Hello everyone, my name is Thomas, and today we're going to be going over some of the tools to allow you to put color onto your page. We're going to be covering a few tools. We're going to be covering the brush tool, the pencil tool, the paint bucket fill tool, and the gradient tool. And these are the three main ones to put color onto a page, just in its pure form, just in color. So to start, we're going to be talking about the paintbrush tool, and the paintbrush tool is a pretty self-explanatory one on the surface, but it does have other purposes throughout Photoshop. The main and most obvious purpose is just to paint. So here we can see that it just creates lines. So to determine the color, the paintbrush tool will default to the foreground color, which is the square that's always in front up here, but we can change it by clicking on the foreground color, or clicking on the square, and changing the color using this wheel. You can see we chose a purple color, and now the line is purple. And there's different functions that you can do with the paintbrush tool. As you can see, I went up to this little tab right here where there's a circle and a number. We're just this is basically the shape of your brush, and then the size. Right now I have it on 69 point. As you can see, we have this menu, and on this menu we have a few different settings. The first one is this square right here. This has a circle with like a crosshair and then two dots and an arrow. And this is the direction of your brush. And we'll get more to this when we have asymmetrical brushes and kind of the special brushes. With a circular brush, it doesn't do a whole lot. The arrow changes its direction, and these dots on the side, you can actually change their the width of the brush, and you can see it updates up here. And so now we have a brush that, if you go this way, paints a very wide line, but if we go this way, paints a much thinner line. So this is good for stuff like if you're doing like calligraphy. So if I were to write my name, Thomas, you can see that we get some nice different line thickness. It's not the best script, but you can certainly mess around with it. We can also change the direction now. So before it was facing this way, where those kinds of lines were thinner, but if we turn it this way, now those lines are thicker. And so yeah, that changes the shape of the brush. You can just reset it by grabbing one of these dots and just bringing it out as far as you can until it becomes a full circle, and then you're back to a normal, just a normal brush. That no matter which way you draw, creates an even thickness line. Next, we have our size. It's pretty self-explanatory. If we go for like a 40, we go like a 28 point font, or not font, 28 pixel brush. It's a much thinner line than say a 354 pixel brush, which is a lot bigger. Pretty self-explanatory. Hardness. This actually affects the hardness of the edge of the brush. So if you remember when we were talking about selection tools and we talked about the feather property, if we were to go back to the marquee tool, remember when we had the feather property and drew, actually, let's turn up the feather. Say we had 20 point, and then when we filled it, it had this soft edge around the edge, how it wasn't such a defined line. Well, the hardness is essentially the same thing, just by a different name. So if we go back, right now we have 100% hardness, which we'll take it down. Actually, keep it big. Nice and big. So if we have a nice big brush and we have a hardness of 100, you'll see that we have a very hard edge line. If we zoom in, See, there is no feathering when it comes to the edges. If we turn down the hardness, we'll do 2 lines. We'll do one at 50%. You can see it's a little softer, and then we'll do the same thing. I got to this menu, by the way, by right-clicking. Right-click and change a setting. And there we go. So as you can see on each one, this one has a near perfect hardness on the line, a hard edge. This one has a slightly softer one. As you can see, we have this, it is full purple over here. And then as we get to about here, you start to see the checkerboard. And what the checkerboard signifies is that there is 0 transparency. This is full opacity. This is about half opacity. And then this is 0. This is full transparency. That means there's absolutely nothing. And if you use PNG files or another file that supports transparency, you will see nothing over here. You'll only have data for what actually has opacity. So we can see that as we go over, go back, and this one, it's kind of hard to tell when you can't look at them side by side, but I might actually be able to. So as you can see, the edge is there's a bit more feather when it comes to the edge. It's not as harsh. It's not as hard of a jump from, you can see the transparency starts here and then slowly gets more opaque by the time it gets to about here. Maybe like 2 checker boxes over, maybe 3 checker boxes. It's at full transparency. Well, this one, you might have 5, 6, 7, or 8 checker boxes of transparency before you get to full opacity. So that covers the paintbrush tool. Up here we have some settings. Like I said, here's the menu to adjust the settings. You can also change the brush. So it has some presets right here, a hard, round, pressure sizes. So if you have a tablet, you can set up Photoshop to recognize your tablet, and then you can use the pressure sensitivity on the brush, on the pen, to affect the opacity. And then we also have some of these other categories of brushes. You have your dry media brushes, which they're just special effects brushes. So rather than having a round shape like these other brushes, if we make this a lot bigger, you can see it does something different. So this one is like a paint splatter, or like if you've ever used sponges. What is this one actually called? Charcoal pencil. So it's trying to mimic the look of charcoal pencil. I'm sure this looks a lot better if you use a much smaller brush, like it was done. I'm sure there's better ways to use it, but just for demonstration purposes, you can see that it has a very like flaky but splattery texture to it. Okay, closer. You can see it. It's not a perfectly. It has transparency within the brush. The next one we have are some of these other ones. Wet media brushes. These simulate, your paints, your ink. Do the inking. Make it nice and big. These ones are a little harder to show off because they don't have that crazy transparency. Okay, so this particular brush, it has different effects, and you can actually see, depending on the icon here, it'll actually it functions as a brush, but it uses a different tool. So, for instance, this one is using the smudge tool. Let's see the smudge tool. If we go back, you can see this one uses the paintbrush, this one uses the color mixer paintbrush, which I was going to get to. This one actually uses the erase tool, so this one is just a flat out eraser. And you can see it goes to the eraser tool. The next thing we're going to talk about is the opacity. The opacity is just how see-through it is. At 100%, the brush is completely transparent, or completely opaque, which means you can't see through it. And at, we'll just go to like 30% opacity. You can see that you can just barely start to see it. If I draw over it a few more times, you can see that that starts to get some color out of it. And this is good for giving that fine control over your project. When you're painting something and don't want to just draw a completely opaque line, you want to do some shading. This is a good way to do it. The next one is flow. Flow is kind of related to opacity. With flow, just turn that off. Flow basically tells Photoshop how much ink. It tells Photoshop how much ink to put onto the page when that brush is moving. So if I have flow at 100%, we'll actually get rid of all of this. Start new. We'll actually use a normal brush. Just go with a hard brush. So if I have flow at 100%, just draws a normal line. And you'll really start to see this when you get down to the lower flow values. But if I use 20% flow value, you can see that as I drag, if I kind of drag over it, you can see we get some different kind of opacities. You can see as I went over the areas that I had drawn over, the opacity kind of changed, and we got different values we got different shades of color. And so that's a really cool tool if you want to get some very unique shading. Smoothing, this works great if you have like a pen. It just tells Photoshop how much to smooth your line. And what it'll do is basically so at the 0% smoothing, your mouse is the paintbrush, or your pen or your mouse, that is the paintbrush. Imagine you're actually holding a pen. You know how when you draw a line, it's not smooth. That was me trying to draw a straight line. See, it kind of comes up and goes down and up and down, and it's not very straight. Well, what smoothing does is basically attaches a rope to your pen from your hand to the pencil. And what it does is smooths out some of the jerky movements that your hand does when you're holding a pen. So if I turn it up to 20%, let's do it again. See how that was a lot smoother. If we go to 30, we'll go to 40%. Even smoother. But as you can see, it kind of lags behind. So I'll put my pen down and I'll start moving. You can see how the line kind of lags behind. We'll get rid of all this and we'll actually use a smaller brush. So you can see that it kind of lags behind. And that's on purpose. That's imagine that tiny rope. It's almost like a rubber band. But as we go slower, the rope, the quote-unquote rope, gets a lot smaller. So this is good for like if you want to do calligraphy. So it's good if you like do it quick. It's not great if you want to do like small intricate movements because you have to move your hand a lot further. But that basically explains smoothing. Imagine like a rope being attached between your hand and the pencil or the paintbrush, and that rope smooths out the jerky movements. And the final thing we'll talk about with the paintbrush tool is the Symmetry tool. And it's exactly what it is. It's symmetry. So what you can do is you have a bunch of presets for the type of symmetry that you want to use: vertical, horizontal, diagonal, circle, and we'll get into some of these. But what you can do is you can set a vertical, say a vertical symmetry, and then you can adjust where that line of symmetry will be. So say you want it over here. If you then get out your pencil, what you can do is you can draw over here, and it'll appear on the other side. Same over here. If you draw, just because I'm too far away, you can draw on this side. You can then draw on this side. You can even hop over, which creates a really cool effect. This works really well if you have smoothing on, because you can create some really interesting designs. If you want to get rid of it, you can just use symmetry off, and there we go. That'll be your symmetry done with. And you can change the various settings. You can use a spiral one. You can also change how big it is. If you hold shift, it'll keep its shape, but if you don't want it like that, if you want a really like oblong one, keep it like that. Then you can click the check mark, or just press enter, or just go to a different tool. This one is a little funky just because depending on how close you are to one particular line, it'll sometimes switch between lines. So basically, this one is really obvious because it's quite far away. But if you're over here, it'll draw on, it knows that you're probably wanting to draw on this line of symmetry. But if you're in like a little place where it's a little harder to reach, you know, say you get a little too far, or you just want like a line further out, it'll think you're trying to draw on this line of symmetry rather than just going out kind of far from this line of symmetry. There's not really much you can do about that. It's just kind of like, it's just the way it is. But yeah, so we'll turn off the symmetry. And the next one we'll talk about is the pencil tool. And the pencil tool is exactly like the paintbrush tool, except that it has no option for, remember how we had a hardness value? Well, if I turn that down to 0, remember 0 was like the most feathered. Remember that 0 was the most feathered option, and 100% was the hardest option, the hardest line. Well, no matter what I do, so this one we see is at a hardness of 0, so it should have a huge feather on it, but if I draw a line, there's no feather. Not even any anti-aliasing. So it's just a purely hard line. Something I got use out of it was if you click somewhere, if you just click and make a dot, and then you hold shift and click somewhere else, it'll draw a straight line between the two. Then I think you can hold shift and just start clicking, and that'll create straight lines. And this can also be done with the paintbrush tool. If I go back, paintbrush tool, and I click the dot, and then click it over there. You can do the exact same thing, but if I was trying to make really hard straight lines, just wanted a tool that could do it, I'd usually go to the pencil tool to do that. Again, it has all of the same tools as the paintbrush tool, so there's not much going to go over there. The next tool we'll be talking about is the gradient tool. Now, the gradient tool is really fun just because, I don't know, for me, gradients were always super satisfying. So it does, as it says, it creates a gradient. Basically, you'll just pick a point where you want to start the gradient, then pick a point where you want to end the gradient by clicking and dragging. You can see there's a little line, and then if you let go, it'll create that gradient over the entire page, or the entire layer. If you want to limit the constraints of a gradient, say you don't want it over the entire frame, what you can do is you can create a marquee of any shape. I just used a rectangular one. Then if you go back to the gradient tool, you can find that gradient to that space. So you no longer have the gradient over the entire thing, you can just have it over a little portion. Some of the different settings. So The way the gradient tool works is it uses your foreground and your background color by default. However, it has preset gradients that you can choose from. So you have your blues, purples, pinks, reds, orange, greens, grays, clouds, iridescent, pastels, neutrals. It has a whole bunch of them. These ones are downloaded. But yeah, each of these, and the way you can change it is by going to your basics. And so you want specific colors, so you go to your basics, and then you can change your foreground to, I don't know, green, and your background to I'll go with the yellow. Yellow, and as you can see, there's green and yellow gradient. What you can also do is if you just want your foreground color and nothing else, what you can do is set it up as a foreground to transparent, and what that'll do is, if we do it on a little thing, you can see that it starts off as fully opaque, and then as we get more and more to the right, it becomes more transparent. And then you can also just have it to just your plain black and white gradient, which is what it comes as. And if you want to modify the gradient, what you can do is you can click the actual gradient itself. So before I was clicking the arrow to pull up this menu of all the different types of gradients. But if I want to change one or even modify a preset, I can click the gradient itself. So in this menu, you can modify the gradient. So what you can do with this one is if you click just below the bar, it's not when the mouse cursor is an eyedropper, but rather just below it where it's a hand. And if you click down below it, you'll see that a new little tab comes up. And what you can do is you can slide this one way or the other and modify how the gradient is affected. So right now it's a green color, as you can tell by this. And what you can do is you can shift this over to the green side where it's not really doing much, or you can shift it over to the yellow side where it's, there's a lot less yellow now. But if I change the color by clicking the box, what I can do is change the color and we'll make it something not so garish. We'll actually just go to black. And you can see better what this is actually doing. As you can see, it's shifting the color of where the gradient is. And what these dots do between them is adjust that gradient even further. So what you can do is just between the distance between this dot or this tab and this tab, the full black and full yellow, I can shift the gradient. And again, just like on this side, if I grab the center, I can do the same. If I want like no green, just all black, I can do that. And if you just click OK, it'll save as is. It won't save forever unless you save it, which we'll show you in a second. But now I have this really strange and kind of ugly gradient, but it's the gradient that we created, so here we are. So to save a gradient, what you'll do is, again, click the menu, and you'll just click New. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it, green, black, yellow. Say New. And there we go. Now it's saved as a gradient. Click OK. We can pick a different gradient, and now it'll be down at the bottom. Close this. And you can see it's our own pre-made gradient just hidden within there. And so that's how we'll create gradients. If we want to add more colors, again, you'll just click down in the bottom. So down in the center, we have a greenish color. We'll make that like a blue. And if I want another color, again, just click just below, and now we have a new color. This one will make a red or an orange. And now we can adjust those so that way they fit a little better. We can also change these tabs over at the end. We can even bring these tabs out so that way, say you just want just a smidge of yellow or a smidge of green, blue, and orange, and just want mainly yellow. Well, now you can have that. And This one actually doesn't look half bad. Create a new gradient. Again, it's the one we created. And to get the straight lines, I'm holding Shift. That'll snap to 45-degree increments, so 0, 45, 90, and etc. There we go. It's not a half bad gradient, but there we go. Those are created gradients. For some of the other settings that come with it, you can have more than just a linear, it's called a linear gradient, where just a straight line between the gradients. We have several different types of gradients. So right here is the linear one. This one is a radial gradient, so I'm just actually going to cover everything. Create a new layer. So with this one, the first point will be your center point, and your next point will be everything outwards. So you can see that, you know, it's a circle. It's a radial gradient. It's nice if you're creating like tie-dye. If you want to create like a tie-dye feel, that's how you'll do it. The next one we have is an angle gradient. This one is a little different. It does it in a circle. So we start on green, and as we go around in a circle, it changes colors to the gradients. We start at green, then we go to blue, orange, and we have all that yellow. The next gradient is the reflected gradient, and it's basically like a linear gradient just with a mirror. Like imagine if you put a linear gradient to a mirror. So what it does is, you can see that I drew the line this way, and so a normal linear gradient would be green, blue, orange, and then yellow. But this one does it in reverse as well, in the other direction. So you have green, blue, orange, yellow, etc. Pretty simple. The next one is the diamond, or the star. Diamond, yeah. This one is just creates a diamond. Again, from the center, it goes green, blue, orange, yellow, just in a diamond shape. And the only thing that you need to worry about, the only properties that you need to worry about as a beginner is the opacity. Again, we've been over opacity. You can actually see what it does in the little toolbar right there. It just changes how transparent the gradient is. So at 0% or 1%, sorry, you can't see it, and then at 100%, fully opaque. And then the other thing is the reverse. So you can actually change the direction, or essentially the direction of the gradient. So see how it goes from green, blue, orange, and then to yellow. Now we have it in the opposite direction. We have a lot of yellow, followed by orange, blue, and then green. So pretty self-explanatory. Dither and transparency. Dither, we won't worry about dithering. And then with transparency, it just allows for and like this one, if we didn't allow transparency, it will just fill it in with the color. It essentially functions as a fill tool now. If we go here, we can have green to yellow. What if we go back to our green to transparent? You'll see that it just fills it in with whatever the most recent color is, or the latest color. And the final tool we'll be talking about is the paint bucket tool. And this one is pretty simple. If you remember how the Magic Wand tool works, how it is looking for a color and specifically selects colors within a certain range based on its tolerance. Well, the paint bucket tool is the exact same thing, but rather than selecting a certain color, it replaces that color with whatever pattern or color you chose. So I'm actually going to switch and find a picture, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have a photo of a flower right here. It has some kind of gradient colors to it, so it's not super simple for it to pick out, but so let me show you. So if I say if I want to replace, this isn't good for, unless you start to change the color modes, just as it is out of the box. It's not really good for painting over stuff. You want to keep the detail. If you want to keep the detail, don't use this tool as it comes. You'll need to change some settings, possibly the opacity, but for now we'll just do it as 100%, and tolerance, we'll go with a pretty stringent tolerance. We'll go 30%. And if I just click on this, reddish area, it'll select the reddish areas with a 30%-ish tolerance, which it does some math to figure out, but it selects similar colors that are around there, and once it gets to a certain threshold, it doesn't go any further than that. But if I were to, say, increase the tolerance to, say, something like 70, and were to click an area like, I don't know, this pinkish area over here, see that it selects a lot more. And even if I click on some of the other areas, it still selects a lot more. And so that's what it will do. The opacity just changes how transparent it is. So you can keep some detail if you lower the opacity a little bit. That actually looks kind of cool. I quite like the look of that. But overall, that'll be it for this tutorial. And in the next tutorial, I'll be talking about the text tool. So I'll see you then.